Welcome to Classification in Orange. Classification is a way for machine learning to answer the question, is this A or B or even C? It allows us to put data samples into categories. For example, is this fruit an apple, a pear, or a banana? How about, is this credit card transaction fraudulent or normal? In this exercise, we're going to be going through the Titanic dataset. We're going to be looking at different passengers aboard the Titanic and ask them, is this passenger a survivor or not a survivor? Let's get started. Click on New and right-click and click on File. This creates our file item again. Double-click on that, and above here in the drop-down tab, click and look for titanic.tab. Okay. And now we see that this is the Titanic dataset. We have 2,201 instances. These are 2,201 data samples. And each data sample is a passenger aboard the Titanic, aboard the actual Titanic. And we have information on all of these passengers, whether they survived or they didn't survive. And their status, were they crew, were they holding a first class, second class, third class ticket, were they an adult or a child, and were they male or female? Right, let's get out of this screen, click on close, and then click on drag so we can view this in a table, just to get to know our data a bit more. Data table, double click on that, and we can see our data in the form of a table. Not super useful now, but it's good to just get to know our data. Let's close this. And from here, let's click and drag again to split our data into two parts with our data sampler. Type in data sampler and press enter. So again, data sampler allows us to split our data into one part, which we'll use for training the model, and the other part, which will be used to evaluate our trained model and make predictions to test our model. Okay, so from data sampler, we'll click and drag up. We're going to use a decision tree this time to create our model. It's going to be a decision tree classification model. So type tree. This is our decision tree model. To look at what the decision tree model is doing behind the scenes, click and drag from here, and then look at Tree Viewer. Tree Viewer, click on that. Now we can double click on Tree Viewer, which is going to be quite interesting. The first thing that we notice here in this tree, you can click and drag left and right to look at the parts of the tree. At the top of the tree is the most important thing that we are question that's being asked, which will determine whether the sample is a survivor or not a survivor. Actually, at the top, it already says no. Most passengers are not survivors. 66% of them are actually not survivors, based on the training data. Then the most important factor is the sex of the passenger. If it's a female, they are more likely to be yes. Yet, in fact, a 74% chance to be a survivor if they are female. So it was actually very good to be a female on board the Titanic. And if they were male, 78% of the males were not survivors. And you can see along each branch what was the next most important factor. For males, the next most important factor was adults. If you were an adult, you are more likely to not be a survivor. If you were a child, you are more likely to be a survivor. 52% you would have not survived, but that was much better than the adults. All right, well, let's get out of here. And we're going to actually make our predictions now. So remember, we use this part of our training data, of our data to train the model. And the rest of the data, we're going to use it to make predictions. Click and drag. Let's go and look for predictions. And again, instead of data sample, we want this to be remaining data. So double click on the connection between data sample and predictions. Click on the line itself, double click, and drag from remaining data to data. We want to use the data we didn't use to train the model to test the model. And then now we need to use this train the model, this decision tree model that we trained, to make predictions. So click on the tree and drag to predictions. We're all hooked up, and we can double click on predictions. So now we see something really interesting again. On the right side are the data that we started with. Notice there are only 660 rows in this case, because this is only the second part of the data. The data that wasn't shown to the model when it was being trained. Remember, we split the data into two parts. So, and it shows all of the information here that we had at the start. But we have one new column, which is tree. These are the predictions that our decision tree model made. And we can compare them to the actual value. The actual value here, which is whether the passenger survived or not. So for the first passenger, they didn't survive, and our decision tree model predicted that, hey, they didn't survive at 53% chance. You see this 0.53? 53% chance didn't survive. So it predicted they didn't survive. And it was correct. Same here. And in the second passenger, it predicted it didn't survive. They didn't survive, but actually they survived. Right? So you can see that actually for most of them, it guesses correctly. You can see even from passenger number 3 up to 17, it was all correct. No. Up to 18, it's wrong again. Okay, but it was pretty close. It said 53% for it to not have survived, and it actually survived. So now we can see the accuracy metrics at the bottom of the screen to see how accurate our model actually was. Great job. We've actually created a decision tree classification AI model to predict which passengers on the Titanic were survivors or not.